It was a miracle of physics. A hollowed-out cone of high explosive, capable of melting through inches of hardened German steel like a hot knife through butter. On paper, it was the perfect infantry weapon, a giant killer for every G.I. But in the mud and blood of the battlefield, this miracle was attached to a rocket that flew like a drunken goose. The most powerful anti-tank warhead of its time was utterly useless, because American ingenuity had solved the problem of penetration, but had forgotten the simple matter of hitting the target. This is the story of a weapon on the brink of failure, and the one man whose reckless idea turned it into a legend. The dawn of the 1940s was a dark time for the Allied infantryman. He was a man of flesh and bone, armed with bolt-action rifles and machine guns, facing a new god of the battlefield, the tank. German Panzer divisions, the armored spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, moved with a terrifying combination of speed and power. For a soldier in a foxhole, the approach of a Panzer III or Panzer IV was a primal, gut-wrenching experience. It began with a tremor in the earth, a low-frequency hum that grew into the clatter of steel treads and the roar of a powerful engine. They were relentless, methodical, and seemingly invincible. What did a soldier have to fight back? The British had their Boy's anti-tank rifle, a monstrously heavy weapon that kicked like a mule and was obsolete the moment it entered service. Its small, hardened projectile might chip the paint on a Panzer IV, but it would rarely do more. Other solutions were even more desperate. The British Piat was clumsy, and the infamous sticky bomb, a glass sphere of nitroglycerin coated in adhesive, required a soldier to run directly up to a moving tank and slap it onto its hull. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. Casualties mounted, and with them a growing sense of helplessness. Morale, the bedrock of any army, was cracking under the weight of German steel. Infantry divisions were being outmaneuvered, overrun, and annihilated because they lacked a weapon that could give one man a fighting chance against one tank. But deep within the laboratories and proving grounds, a scientific principle first observed in the 19th century was being weaponized. It was called the shaped charge, or the Monroe effect. The concept was both simple and revolutionary. Instead of using explosive force to batter through armor, a shaped charge focused the entire blast into a single, needle-thin jet of molten metal, traveling at over 25,000 feet per second. This superheated plasma didn't punch through steel. It vaporized it, creating a catastrophic hole and spewing fire and shrapnel into the tank's interior. This was the giant killer the Allies desperately needed. The challenge was delivery. How could you get this delicate, precisely engineered warhead to the target safely and effectively? The task fell to a small team within U.S. Army Ordnance, led by Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Ull. In May of 1942, they unveiled their creation. It was a simple steel tube just over 5 feet long with a rudimentary sight and an electrical firing mechanism powered by batteries. It fired a 6.5-pound rocket tipped with the shaped charge warhead. During a demonstration, an observer, looking at the contraption of pipes and wires, remarked that it looked like the comedian Bob Burns's bizarre musical instrument, the bazooka. The name stuck. On paper, the M1 Bazooka was a triumph. It was light enough for a two-man team to carry, cheap to produce, and its rocket could theoretically defeat any tank then in service. An order for thousands of units was rushed through. But as the first production models rolled off the line in late 1942, a fatal flaw became terrifyingly apparent. The launch tube was a simple, smoothbore pipe. The rocket, stabilized only by small fins, was inherently unstable in flight. It would wobble, drift, and corkscrew through the air, its trajectory a matter of pure chance. For soldiers in training, the results were dismal. Hit rates, even on stationary targets at close range, were under 40%. A weapon that misses its target 60% of the time isn't a weapon. It's a liability. The miracle warhead was a passenger on a journey with no reliable destination. By December of 1942, the reports filtering back from training grounds and the first limited combat deployments were not just bad. They were catastrophic. The M1 Bazooka was developing a reputation as a weapon of last resort, a tool that inspired more fear in its user than in the enemy. Soldiers told stories of rockets veering wildly off course, slamming into the ground a few dozen feet from the muzzle, or spiraling harmlessly into the sky. Firing the bazooka became a tense gamble. A G.I. had to expose himself to enemy fire, shoulder the weapon, and pray that this time the rocket would fly true. This wasn't just a technical failing, it was a psychological one. A soldier needs to trust his weapon as he trusts his own hands. The M1 was breeding doubt, a corrosive acid that eats away at the will to fight. The Ordnance Department was in a crisis. They had promised the infantry a shield against the panzers, but had delivered a broken sword. The problem attracted the attention of a man who was not a soldier, not an army engineer, but a civilian who understood the heart of the weapon better than almost anyone. His name was Henry Mohaupt. A Swiss engineer with a quiet, scholarly demeanor, Mohaupt was a world-renowned expert on the shaped charge. He had been instrumental in refining the very warhead that made the bazooka so potent. He knew that the magic of the shaped charge depended on precision. For the jet of molten metal to form correctly and achieve maximum penetration, the warhead had to strike the target's armor as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. The wobbling, unstable flight of the M1 rocket was anathema to this principle. A rocket that struck at a glancing angle would dissipate its energy, resulting in a shallow, ineffective crater instead of a clean, catastrophic kill. Mohaupt watched the tests, analyzed the reports, and came to a conclusion that was as simple as it was heretical. The rocket needed to spin. In the world of firearms, this was elementary. For centuries, gunsmiths had cut spiraling grooves, or rifling, into the barrels of rifles. As the bullet traveled down the barrel, the rifling forced it to rotate, creating gyroscopic stability. A spinning object, like a child's top, resists tumbling. It stays true to its path. Mohaupt proposed applying this exact principle to the bazooka's launch tube. By cutting rifling into the tube, the rocket's fins would catch the grooves, forcing the entire projectile to spin as it exited the muzzle. This spin, he argued, would stabilize its flight, cure its accuracy problems, and ensure it struck the target head-on. To the established engineers of U.S. Army Ordnance, this was nonsense. It flew in the face of everything they understood about rocketry. A rocket wasn't a bullet. It wasn't propelled by a single, instantaneous explosion behind it. It was propelled by a continuous burn, a jet of hot gas pushing it from the rear. Their doctrine stated that forcing a rocket to spin would create immense drag, robbing it of its velocity and range. Worse, the torque could damage the delicate fin assembly or even interfere with the rocket motor's burn. The idea was officially presented to Colonel William Crozier, a senior officer in the Ordnance Department. Crozier was a man of logistics and established procedure. He saw Mohaupt's proposal not as a stroke of genius, but as a dangerous deviation. He also had a very practical problem. The Army had already produced and paid for 14,000 smoothbore M1 Bazookas. A change in design would mean retooling factories, scrapping existing inventory, and creating a logistical nightmare of two different ammunition types in the field. Crozier's rejection was swift and absolute. The answer was no. The established science and the practical realities of wartime production slammed the door shut on Mohaupt's reckless idea. For many, a flat denial from a figure like Colonel Crozier would have been the end of the road. The Army had spoken. But Henry Mohaupt was not a soldier accustomed to rigid hierarchies. He was a scientist driven by a conviction rooted in the laws of physics. He knew he was right. Rebuffed by the bureaucracy, he did something that in the military world was a cardinal sin. He went around the established chain of command. He sought an audience with a man who had the power to overrule colonels and cut through red tape, a man whose entire career was dedicated not to logistics, but to innovation. That man was General Gladian Barnes, the head of the Ordnance Department's Research and Development Division. General Barnes was a different breed of officer. While Crozier saw production schedules and inventory lists, Barnes saw the future of warfare. He understood that victory in this new, mechanized war would belong to the side that could adapt and innovate the fastest. He was keenly aware that the reports on the M1 Bazooka were not just disappointing. They were a death sentence for the project, and more importantly, for the men who were forced to rely on it. When Mohaupt presented his case, Barnes listened. He wasn't hearing the ramblings of a reckless civilian. He was hearing a logical, elegant solution to a problem that was costing American lives. Mohaupt explained the principle of gyroscopic stability, the failure of simple fins in providing consistent flight, and the critical importance of a direct 90-degree impact for the shape charge. He wasn't just complaining about a problem. He was offering a tangible, testable fix. General Barnes looked at the same data as Colonel Crozier, but saw a different reality. He saw that the risk of retooling factories was nothing compared to the risk of sending men into battle against panzers with a weapon that worked less than half the time. He made a decision that sent shockwaves through the Ordnance Department. He overruled Colonel Crozier. He greenlit a direct comparative test. On January 28, 1943, a small group of officers and engineers gathered at the windswept ranges of the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. The air was frigid, the mood equally so. This was not a routine quality check. It was a showdown. On one side of the firing line lay the standard issue M1 Bazooka, its smoothbore tube, a symbol of established military doctrine. Beside it lay Mohaupt's creation, a prototype launcher, outwardly identical except for the faint, swirling grooves machined into the last few inches of its barrel. The targets were thick plates of rolled homogeneous armor, the same type used on German tanks, set up at typical combat ranges. The skepticism among the career ordnance officers was palpable. They were there to witness a civilian's pet project fail, to confirm what they already believed, that rifling a rocket launcher was a fool's errand that would only result in a slower, less effective projectile. Henry Mohaupt stood among them, a lone civilian in a sea of uniforms, his entire theory, his professional reputation, and the potential future of infantry warfare resting on the next few moments. The stage was set for one of the most consequential weapons tests of the Second World War. The order was given to prepare the first rocket for the standard M1. A generation of anti-tank warfare was about to be decided. The test began with the control group, the standard smoothbore M1 Bazooka. The two-man crew, veterans of countless similar demonstrations, went through the motions with practiced efficiency. The loader slipped the M6 rocket into the rear of the tube, connected the contact wires, and tapped the gunner's helmet. Up! The gunner aimed, his body tense, compensating for the weapon's known eccentricities. He squeezed the trigger. There was the familiar whoosh and a backblast of smoke and dust. The rocket leaped from the tube, and for a moment it flew straight. Then, the telltale wobble began. It was a slight, almost imperceptible fishtailing motion that grew more pronounced as it traveled downrange. It struck the armor plate, but not dead on. It hit at a slight angle, sending a shower of sparks flying. They fired again. This time, the rocket corkscrewed more violently, missing the plate entirely, and burying itself in the frozen earth behind it. The third shot also hit, but again at a poor angle. Over the course of the trial, the smoothbore M1 achieved a hit rate of approximately 73% on the large, stationary target, far better than the 40% reported in field training, but still deeply troubling. More revealing was the analysis of the impacts. The craters in the armor plate were shallow, gouged-out scoops. The vaunted shaped charge had failed to perform its magic. The average penetration was measured at a meager 3.9 inches of steel. Against the frontal armor of a Panzer IV, it was barely adequate. Against the new fearsome Tiger tank, which was just beginning to appear on the battlefield, it was utterly useless. A palpable sense of "I told you so" hung in the cold Maryland air. The results were exactly what the Ordnance traditionalists had expected. The weapon was flawed, yes, but it was the best they had. Then it was Mohaupt's turn. The crew moved to the rifled prototype. They loaded the same M6 rocket into the tube. The procedure was identical. The gunner took aim, perhaps with even more skepticism than before. He pulled the trigger. The whoosh sounded the same, but the projectile's flight was a world of difference. It was a perfect, unwavering line. The rocket flew as if it were a bullet fired from a sniper's rifle, spinning on its axis, completely stable. It slammed into the center of the target plate with a sharp, definitive crack. The result was breathtaking. There was no shallow crater, no glancing blow. There was a small, perfectly round hole, no bigger than a finger, punched clean through the steel. A jet of incandescent metal had vaporized its way through the armor, as if it were cardboard. They fired again. Another perfect straight flight, another direct hit, and another. Shot after shot, the rifled prototype performed flawlessly. The crew achieved a 100% hit rate. Every single rocket flew true. The change in performance was not incremental, it was revolutionary. When the engineers measured the penetration of these impacts, the numbers silenced every skeptic on the field. The spin-stabilized rockets, striking the armor at a perfect 90-degree angle every time, had achieved an average penetration of 8.1 inches. It was more than double the performance of the smoothbore version. The debate was over. The data was irrefutable. In the space of a single morning, Henry Mohaupt's reckless theory had been vindicated in the most dramatic fashion possible. General Barnes had his proof. The rifled bazooka was not just a minor improvement, it was a completely different weapon. It was the giant killer the infantry had been praying for. The order was given immediately. Halt production of the M1. All future models would incorporate rifling. The era of the smoothbore bazooka was over. The effect of the Aberdeen test on January 28th was instantaneous and decisive. The machinery of American wartime production, once set in motion, could move with incredible speed. Blueprints were redrawn, factory tooling was changed, and a new model was born, the M1 Bazooka. It was nearly identical to its predecessor, but with one crucial, war-winning difference. The last few inches of its launch tube contained the spiraling grooves conceived by Henry Mohaupt. By April of 1943, just 3 months after the test, the first crates of these new rifled bazookas were being unloaded in the dusty ports of North Africa. They were rushed to the front lines of the Tunisia campaign, where American G.I.s were locked in a brutal struggle against the hardened veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps. For the soldiers who received them, the difference was night and day. A weapon that had once been a source of frustration and fear was now a source of confidence. The stories from the field began to change. No longer were they tales of missed shots and desperate gambles. Now, they were accounts of panzers brewing up in columns of black smoke, their steel hides punctured by a small, almost surgical hole. A two-man team, concealed in a ditch or a ruined building, could now confidently engage and destroy a 40-ton beast from a football field away. The psychological impact was immense. The balance of power on the infantry battlefield was shifting. The tank was no longer an unassailable god of war. It was a target. This newfound effectiveness was proven again and again, from the bloody beachheads of Anzio and Salerno in Italy to the dense, claustrophobic hedgerow country of Normandy. After the D-Day landings in June of 1944, the breakout into the French countryside, known as Operation Cobra, became a brutal, grinding fight from one hedgerow to the next. Here, the improved M1 Bazooka, a more refined rifled model that could be broken down to 2 pieces for easier carrying, became the G.I.s' best friend. German Panther and Tiger tanks, superior in armor and firepower, found the bocage to be a deadly labyrinth. Every corner, every thicket of ancient shrubs could hide a bazooka team. The short engagement ranges, often less than 100 yards, negated the long-range advantage of the German tank cannons and played directly to the bazooka's strengths. A single, well-placed shot from an M9 could cripple a Panther, snapping its track, or, with a shot to the thinner side armor, brew it up completely. The bazooka became a key component of American infantry tactics, an area denial weapon that made German armored advances costly and dangerous. But perhaps the weapon's finest hour came during the darkest days of the war in Europe. In December of 1944, the German army launched its last great offensive in the West, striking through the snow-covered Ardennes forest in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Elite SS Panzer divisions, equipped with the heaviest tanks of the war, spearheaded the attack, shattering the thinly held American lines. At besieged crossroads like Bastogne, surrounded and outnumbered American paratroopers and infantrymen used their M9 bazookas to hold the line against overwhelming odds. In the frozen forests, small teams of bazooka gunners became tank hunters, stalking German armor in the fog and snow. They turned roads into graveyards of twisted steel, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive and for the tide to turn. The rifled bazooka had transformed from a failed experiment into the indispensable tool that allowed the American infantryman to finally stand his ground against the blitzkrieg. The legacy of Henry Mohaupt's innovation did not end with the surrender of Germany in 1945. The principle of spin stabilizing a rocket with a rifled launcher was now permanently etched into the DNA of American weapon design. The wartime M9 bazooka had proven the concept, but military technology never stands still. The battlefield was already changing. In the final months of the war, the bazooka's 8 inches of penetration, once so impressive, was being tested by the massive frontal armor of the German King Tiger. Furthermore, the Soviet Union was developing a new generation of heavy tanks, like the IS-2 and IS-3, with thick, well-sloped armor that posed a significant challenge. The U.S. Army knew it needed more power. The answer came in the form of the M20, better known as the Super Bazooka. Introduced just after the war, the M20 was a direct evolution of Mohaupt's design, but scaled up for a more formidable era. It fired a larger, 3.5-inch diameter rocket from a rifled aluminum tube. This new rocket was not only more powerful, with a warhead capable of penetrating up to 11 inches of armor, but it was also faster and had a longer, effective range. When war broke out on the Korean Peninsula in 1950, the Super Bazooka was rushed into the hands of American troops to counter the Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks of the North Korean Army. Once again, a rifled, shoulder-fired rocket launcher became the infantryman's primary defense against enemy armor, proving its worth in the rugged, mountainous terrain of Korea. But the evolution continued. The age of electronics and miniaturization brought new possibilities. The core challenge remained the same: how to give a single soldier the power to defeat a tank. The answer, time and again, came back to the fundamental principles proven at Aberdeen. The M72 law, or light anti-tank weapon, introduced during the Vietnam War, took the concept to its logical conclusion. It was a disposable, single-shot rocket launcher. A soldier could carry a lightweight, telescoping tube that was already preloaded with a spin-stabilized rocket. After firing, the tube was simply discarded. This was the ultimate expression of Mohaupt's idea: a simple, reliable, and powerful anti-tank weapon for every single infantryman. The rifled tube ensured the accuracy that had been so disastrously absent in the original M1. The design lineage is unmistakable, a direct line stretching from the desperate days of 1943 to the jungles of Southeast Asia. Even today, the spiritual successors of the bazooka carry forward its legacy. The AT-4, a staple of the U.S. military and many NATO allies, is a single-shot, disposable launcher that fires a fin-stabilized projectile through a smoothbore tube, but the fins are canted to induce spin after it leaves the muzzle, achieving the same gyroscopic stability Mohaupt championed. Other systems, like the SMAW, or shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon, used by the Marine Corps, still rely on a rifled launch tube to spin their rockets for pinpoint accuracy against bunkers and armored vehicles. From the M101 to the M9, the Super Bazooka to the Law and beyond, the fundamental lesson learned on that cold January day held true. For a rocket-propelled grenade to be effective, it must be stable. It must fly straight. And the simplest, most reliable way to achieve that was with the ancient, elegant principle of rifling. The story of the rifled bazooka is more than just a tale of technical innovation. It is a powerful lesson in the culture of warfare and the anatomy of a successful military organization. It highlights the critical, often overlooked tension between established doctrine and disruptive ideas. Colonel Crozier was not an incompetent officer. He was a product of a system that valued logistics, standardization, and proven methods. His initial rejection of Mohaupt's idea was logical, from the perspective of a manager overseeing a massive industrial effort. To him, the risk of upending production for an unproven theory was greater than the risk of fielding a flawed but available weapon. This is the inherent inertia of any large bureaucracy, military or otherwise. It is a force that prioritizes stability over innovation, often to its own detriment. In stark contrast stands General Barnes. He represented the essential counterbalance, a leadership that is willing to listen to outsiders, to challenge its own experts, and to prioritize battlefield effectiveness above all else. His decision to overrule Crozier and authorize the test was not an act of rebellion, but one of true leadership. He understood that in the crucible of war, the only thing that matters is what works. He created a space where a reckless idea from a civilian could be fairly tested against the established military consensus. That single decision, to allow data to trump doctrine, saved countless lives and may very well have altered the course of battles from Normandy to the Ardennes. The narrative also underscores the immense impact a single individual can have, even within the colossal machinery of global conflict. Henry Mohaupt was not a general devising grand strategy or a politician forging alliances. He was an engineer, a specialist, obsessed with a single problem. His persistence, his refusal to accept no for an answer, and his courage to bypass the chain of command were the catalysts for the entire transformation. He fought a battle not with a rifle, but with a slide rule and the unwavering conviction that the laws of physics could solve a problem that was costing men their lives. In the end, the simple, spiraling grooves cut into a steel tube represent one of the most important hardware upgrades of the Second World War. It turned a weapon of chance into a weapon of certainty. It transformed the American G.I. from potential victim to confident tank hunter, fundamentally reshaping the tactical landscape of the infantry fight. The story serves as a timeless reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary changes don't come from creating something entirely new, but from having the wisdom and courage to fix what is broken.